And today I will show you one more last example of how we use direct costing for decision making, a very compelling example. And then we will move on to the next topic of full costing and its uses. So let's start with this example. So until now, all the examples that I showed you related to difficult financial situation. But now I want to show you an example which is the opposite. How we use direct costing, how we use the economic map and the methods that we learn for change analysis when we want to expand programs. Something obviously more desirable than contracting programs. And again, the example is a real example, and that is an organization, a welfare organization. The background is that this is, again, the organization that I began with in my first example when I showed you the economic map that works on the with the population of addictions, prevention of addiction, treatment of addictions. And they had two programs for youth and adults. Again, if you remember the first table. And the background, again, is that the organization was in a difficult economic situation. So the main consideration for any decision making was the economic consideration. Okay, again, to get you back to context, usually in the non-profit world we have two dimensions. We have the social or the goal consideration. What should we do to increase our ability to achieve the social goals of the organization? And we have kind of orthogonal consideration, which is the economic consideration. What will happen to the organization from the economic perspective given the decision that we make? Now, in most cases, we have to weigh them. We have to look at both social and economic considerations. But when we are in a difficult economic situation, debt and stuff like that, then the economic consideration kind of takes over. There's no choice. We have to make sure that the organization will survive. So this organization, since it was in a kind of a shaky financial situation, they received an offer from the Israeli government, from the Ministry of Welfare, to add additional 20 clients to their adults program. Okay? So that is an extent. There's more people who are treated, more money, and they had to consider this. But the consideration, obviously from the social point of view, it's always good to expand our programs. Every organization, the non-profits are small organizations. There is no realistic situation that they can address, that a specific organization can address all the needs in the society. So if an organization that works in the field of addictions receives an offer to treat more people, it's obviously good from the point of view of achieving the organization's goals. But the question was, what will happen to the organization from the economic point of view? And these are the data. So the Ministry of Welfare offered them to finance 20 more adults. Now the monthly rate per each adult was approximately 6,000 shekels at the time. Okay? Now, in order to see what the organization did and what is the dilemma, we go to our Excel file, to a worksheet which is called economic feasibility. Okay, you see economic feasibility, and here we see how the decision process worked and what we can learn from that. So the first stage is that the CFO of this organization decided to calculate the cost of each adult client. Okay? So he did the following calculation, and we can see here in the general, not the detail, but the general items. So he looked at the current year in which they received the offer, and he put down the numbers. Now, since the rates of the Minister of Welfare are given on a monthly basis, he did the calculation also on a monthly basis, but moving from monthly to annual is straightforward. Just multiply by 12. Okay, but we will look at the monthly figures, because this is the calculation he did. So he found that there is salary costs of that program of 130, almost 133,000. Then additional direct cost of the programs like food and medicines and freelancers, treatments, therapies, etc., were additional 91,000. So altogether, what we call the program variable cost that will be presented in the economic map, will be 224,000. But he moved on to do what we call full costing. So he wanted to know what is the full cost of each adult. Okay, so this is the first time that we encounter full costing. Remember that in the economic map, there were parts that were presented separately, the infrastructure and the overhead, general management and fundraising. So he wanted to include these items in his calculation. So now, these items are for the entire organization, so we have to allocate a share of them to each one of the programs. And the topic of our next discussion about full costing is how we do that, how we do this allocation, how do we come up with the scale. Here we will not address this issue, and we will take the scale as given. So he decided to allocate 45% of the program fixed to the adult program. Now, just to give you a sense, so we are talking about this organization, and you can see that the two programs, adult and youth, are the largest programs in the organization, and therefore it makes sense that like 90% of the program fixed will be allocated to them, and then a division of more or less 50-50 between the youth and the adults. So this is just to give you a sense how the 45%, how we get this number, but we will make more accurate calculation later. So 45% of the program fixed were additional 33,000 and something, and then 48% of the overhead was also allocated to this program, so this comes to another 75,000. Altogether, the monthly full cost of this program, according to his calculation, was 332,000. Okay? Now, he took this figure and divided it by the number of people, clients who received service, the number of adults, 31 adults before the change, before the additional 20, and he got approximately 11,000 shekels per month per adult. Now, in order to check himself, he looked at the same figures for the youth, because the cost of treatment, youth and adult, is basically the same. If you're 16 and you're 90 or 20, you eat the same amount of food, and there's no difference in that respect. And he saw that not only that the cost of the youth was the same, but also the rate that the Ministry of Welfare gave the organization for youth was approximately 11,000 shekels. And again, just to remind you, you can see here in the economic map that there is a much larger amount from the government for youth compared to adults. And this is not accidental. This is a policy. The Ministry of Welfare in Israel looks differently on youth and adults, and the ministry is financing the full cost for youth and only half of the cost for adults. This is the ministry's policy, and given the fact that the rate, which is based on the ministry's calculation, was more for youth, was more or less the same, 11,000, he realized that his calculations were more accurate, as much as they can be. So, at that point of time, the organization considered this proposal of adding 20 more adults with a rate of approximately 6,000. Okay? And it was a lucky situation for both the organization and myself. For me, because I had an excellent example that I can use. Yes, Stephanie?
Both of those are for adults, or is the second one for youth? They both say adults.
No, you mean both of what?
Those two graphs are both for adults.
This is for adults.
And the other one?
What is the other one? This one?
Yeah.
I haven't talked about it yet.
Oh. Okay.
In a minute. Okay?
Slow down, Stephanie.
No, it's because he said youth, and I didn't see it.
No, I'm just saying that there is an equivalent
Gotcha.
program for youth, approximately the same number of people, and the calculations are more or less the same. So it's kind of a reasonability test that we do the calculation correctly. So the CFO of the organization told his director, look, there's no way we can take this program because we pay 11,000 shekels per month for each adult. We will receive 6,000 shekels. Obviously, it is a significant loss, and since we are in a difficult situation, then you can do it. They compare the cost per recipient to the rate used on the full costing. Okay? And that, I will show you in a minute why it is the wrong approach. The first stage in the right approach is to calculate the budget or create a budget after the change. Remember what we did in the scenario analysis? We have the base budget, this is now, and we have to create a budget after the change. And this is what we see in the next table, Stephanie. This is the same adults, but now the question, I asked them, prepare a budget for 51 clients instead of 31 clients. Now, we have to remember, we only look here at the numbers, but first of all, in order to prepare a budget for a new situation, you have to create a plan, which means, what does it mean for the organization to have 20 more clients? How many more staff members will they need, and in what kind of occupations? More caregivers, maybe additional social worker, maybe some more hours of psychology. How much food more will you need, how much medicine, etc. So you have to create a new budget based on a new plan, which assumes that now we have 51 clients. And this is the new budget that they created. Again, it is presented in monthly figures. And we can see that salaries increase, obviously we need more staff. Other direct costs increase, obviously we need more materials, more food, more medicine, etc. However, there is no change in the fixed cost. Now, this is not a rule. It depends on the context, which means that the main item of the program fixed cost in this organization, just to remind you, was rent. Okay? Rent and then utilities and municipal taxes. Now, the question that the organization has to ask itself when preparing a new budget is, do I have the space to accommodate additional 20 clients with my existing facility, or do I have to lease additional facility? If I have to lease an additional facility, then obviously there will be a change also in the part of the fixed cost. They will not be fixed anymore. But in this case, the organization had a large facility. There was no problem in accommodating more clients. So the fixed cost, the program fixed cost didn't change, and overhead also didn't change. That you should know as future directors of organization, that when you increase the activity of the organization, nobody is going to give you more salary. Okay, you will get more work for sure, but uncompensated. Okay, so there is no change in the overhead. So these items remain the same. Okay, all in all, the total cost went up from 332 to 406. This is the full cost, monthly cost of the adult program given the new scenario of 51 clients. Now if we want to calculate the cost per client, so we have to divide 406 by 51, and we get approximately 8,000 shekel per client. Much less, you can see. And we'll talk about it. Now, still based on full costing, it seems not economical. Even after the change, each adult will cost us 8,000, but we will get only 6,000, which still seems to be not feasible economically. However, this is also not the right way to make the decision. The right way to make the decision is to use the direct costing, which we saw already, and that is to look at the differences, the additional income versus the additional expenses. So let's see that in the table. So first of all, we ask ourselves, if we move from this budget to this budget, what will be the change in expenses? Remember our table of changes in contribution due to income and due to expenses. So here we start with the change in expenses, and we can see that expenses increased from 332 to 406, about 74,000 shekels. What will be, so that will be with a minus sign, additional expenses. What will be the additional income? So that is very easy to calculate. We have 20 more clients, the additional, times the rate. We will get additional 119,000 in income. So 119,000 in income compared to 74,000 additional expenses, that gives us a change in the contribution of 44,000 with a plus sign. Okay, the additional income will be higher than the additional expenses in a minute by 44,000 per month multiplied by 12. That's about 500,000 per year. Yes, Aidan.
How is it different?
Okay, so we'll talk about that. Why is the difference? But first of all, let's understand the method or how we do the calculation. So in order to evaluate changes, we have to use the direct costing. Using full costing for analysis of changes will give us wrong decision rule. And we can see here that this organization was about to take a wrong decision. And again, it was my luck and their luck that we met at this point. And I refer them to the way to do the calculation using the direct costing, looking at the change in income versus the change in expenses. And then I recommended to them to take the change, to take the additional clients. We have to remember that direct costing or the economic map and the use of changes is the only way to look at or to take economic decision. That's why when I define goal number 1, the presentation of the economic situation for decision making, go, no go. So this is an example of a go decision. The go decision is because we had additional economic contribution. Now, why is that? Why the full costing is very tempting, but also very misleading. The reason is that we have kind of a linguistic problem here, and I kind of misled you on purpose. Okay? When we say client cost us 11,000 or 8,000, when we hear this sentence, it is as if the additional client will cost us this figure. I mean, if I tell you, look, a laptop cost, I don't know, $1,000, it means that if you want to buy another laptop, you will have to pay $1,000 in addition. But this is not the case with these calculations. This is an average cost. It's not the cost of the additional clients. It's an average cost of the existing number of clients, either 31 or 51. And in this average cost, there are a lot of components that remain fixed, even if we add more clients. Like we saw already that the program fixed cost remained fixed, the overhead remained fixed, but also in terms of salaries, if we double the number of clients, we do not necessarily double the number of employees. Okay, we have to increase the number of employees, but usually by less than the increase in the number of clients. Okay, and again, the reason is that although we may not like to hear that, in many positions there is kind of it's called in the clean language idle capacity, which means that if you are in charge of a program and the program deals with 31 clients and now it will deal with 51 clients, you can still do it at the same position. Maybe you will have to do some overtime, but you don't have to increase your level of work at the same proportion. So since costs, specifically labor cost, the cost of employing staff, is not linear. There are some components of cost that are linear, like food is linear. You have more people, they have to eat more. Medicine will be linear. You have more people, they need to have more medicine. But the cost of staff is not linear. It's basically like stairs. You know, there is a certain level, and then it goes up, and then there is another certain level. And that is why full costing, which is an average cost, gives us a misleading understanding of what it means, the cost of a client. Okay, I'll expand a little bit about that in a minute. And the direct costing provides us the exact calculation of the changes. The changes are what, these are the important things in terms of economic decision making. So I don't know if any of you ever taken a course in introduction to microeconomics, and you're familiar with the term marginal cost, which is kind of the main thing in microeconomics. Marginal cost has to be equal to price for the markets to clear. So this is what we call incremental cost versus incremental income, and this is kind of the real life translation of marginal cost. Marginal cost is a theoretical concept of economic theory. Incremental cost is the practical application. Okay? So the practical application is always to look at changes, and just to connect that to what we have seen before. So this is kind of a table of income and expenses on a monthly basis, before and after. You remember in the previous example, we saw a scenario analysis, a budget, the base budget and the new scenario, and then the changes. So we had monthly income of, this is only from the government, okay, monthly income from the government, which is 31 clients times the rate. Okay, that is the before, and that is the after. Okay, so that is the after, which is 51 times the rate, like in your exercise, the one that you'll do for 2 weeks from now. And the difference is 119. Expenses. Okay, so we had the expenses before 224, the expenses of the after, okay, the program variable. So expenses increased by 74. There was no change in the program fix. These are the infrastructure and the overhead in our economic map. And we can see here that what happened was that the economic contribution before was negative, and due to the change, it became positive. The difference is exactly 44,000 in economic contribution. That is the net contribution of the change to the organization. The net effect, again, equivalent to what we saw in our analysis of changes, the change in contribution. And also here we have another term that we haven't discussed yet, but we will discuss, which is surplus and deficit. So I'll get back to that, but it's a good point to start. We have to be very accurate with our definitions. So surplus and deficit are the non-profit equivalent for profit and loss. Okay, and we usually say, well, this program has a profit, this program does not has a profit. So this is not the accurate terminology, because surplus and deficit means income minus all the expenses, while contribution or economic contribution is income minus only the expenses that are related to this program using the direct costing, expenses that will be saved if we close the program. And you can see here that a program can have a positive economic contribution but a deficit, which means that after the change, this program, if we will close it, it will not only it will not benefit the organization will lose 5,000 and something shekels, but still if we look at the overall calculation, we can see that the program is in deficit after adding the share of the fixed cost. That is why surplus and deficit are not good measures to make decisions regarding programs, only the economic contribution. So I'll show you more examples about that when we will discuss full costing more precisely. Okay? So to summarize, okay, so decision by direct costing, we have to estimate the additional cost due to the change and compare it to the additional income. And if we have positive change in contribution, the decision should be, at least from the economic perspective, should be a go. If there is a negative economic contribution, then it's not necessarily no-go. It means that it will affect negatively our economic situation. The question is, can we absorb that additional deficit, the negative economic contribution? Because from the social point of view, we always want to expand our programs. Okay, so before I continue with the points of discussion, is this issue clear? Yes.
Basically just adding the cost of the 20 new clients and factoring that into the budget. There wasn't anything extra special? Again,
when you say adding the cost of the 20 new clients, it depends what cost you mean. I mean, when we talk about, if you look at the example, that's exactly our next point. The cost of a client before the change was 11,000. So if we use the misleading terminology of adding the cost of the additional clients, I should have taken 21 multiplied by 11,000 and add that cost. But this was not the additional costs were much lower. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly the point. The 11,000 is the average cost of the existing clients. It is not what will cost us to add more clients. In order to come up with a number with this 74,000, the additional, what you have to do, there is no shortcut. You have to do it in the long way. You have to create a new plan of how you absorb additional 20 clients in terms of your inputs. Remember the inputs? Yes. Personnel, material, etc. And translate it to a new budget and then calculate the difference. Okay? That is the only way to do that.
Yeah.
You have to have an operational plan. Okay? So when we want to do an analysis of changes, or even scenario analysis, we have to have different operational plan, different from what we have now, that will accommodate the change, and then we translate it to a budget, and then we take the new budget and we compare them and we can make the decision. Okay? All right, now here we have an interesting issue, which is how much does it cost to treat an adult? Okay? Now, the reason I'm raising this point is that this is a very, very common question, especially by donors, like foundations, federations. You know, you want to raise money for a program that has human clients, and they always ask you, so tell me what is the cost of a client so that I know, like, if I give you $100,000, how many more clients can I fund? So here in this example of the organization, we have three numbers that will be appropriate to answer these questions. Obviously, you know, in math, there is something that if one value has three possible answers, then it's called undefined. Okay, so the question is basically, the answer is undefined. So let's see why. Suppose I'm in a situation now that I'm just before the change. I'm doing my calculations for the change. My current cost per client is 11,000, right? I mean, you know, I did the calculation. This is my cost per client. I know that this is a misleading term, but the other side doesn't know that. I mean, people use a lot of terms without understanding what they mean. Okay, what can you do? You can't educate everybody, right? We can educate ourselves. So we know that the average cost, which in the more inaccurate language is called the cost per client, is approximately 11,000. When I do the calculation for the situation after the change, I have another cost, 8,000. Okay? 8,000, that's after the change, and we'll discuss later what is the meaning of the reduction in the cost per client. It has a certain meaning, but right now we won't address it, but later. So let me ask you a question. So you are now fundraisers for this nonprofit, and you are approached not by the government, but by a very generous philanthropic foundation, and they say, well, we want to fund to give you additional 20 clients. So tell us, how much does a client cost, so that, like you asked, John, so we can give you the money. Which figure will you use?
The one that's before.
I remember.
That one, right?
Yeah.
Well, 99% of the people will give that answer. And it's true. I mean, you want to get as much money as you can. The fact that the other side does not understand the subtleties of, you know,
Exactly.
direct costing and full costing, well, why should you care? I mean, so most people, rightly, to my opinion, will say, well, if you want to be more kind of legally right, you can say, my current cost per client is ta 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 ta. And whatever the other side understand, that's not your problem. Okay? We don't lie, but then we cannot educate everybody, right? So most people will use, but we understand that the term itself has very little meaning, because average cost is basically a cost divided by a number of clients. If I had here like 32 clients, probably the denominator will not change, almost not change at all, but I will have a different figure. So it relates to a specific context. Okay? So in this context, this is my cost per client. So we have two figures, before and after, but we have also a third one, which is more meaningful, at least from the economic perspective, which is called the break-even cost per client. This is what you refer to when you ask how much will additional client cost me. So how do we get to this figure? We can get to it directly. First, you have to do the entire calculation. Once we know that the change is approximately 75,000 shekels, it should be the same. I don't know why I entered a different number. Well, doesn't matter, I'll figure it out later. So once we know the change, then we can take this change and divide it by the additional number of clients. Okay? So we have additional 74,000, which is used to accommodate additional 20 clients. This is like the marginal cost in economics. Okay? So in practical language, it will be called the incremental cost of a client. Will be 74 divided by 20. It's approximately 300 and 700 shekels per client. So this is called the break-even, or the incremental cost of one client. And basically what it shows us is what will be the break-even price that the organization can or will agree to receive in order for that proposal to be feasible, okay, to receive the go decision. Any rate above this figure, above the 3,736, will provide positive economic contribution. So it will be desirable economically. Any rate below will be undesirable, will provide a negative economic contribution. So this is a break-even rate, or break-even cost. And this answers your question, John. How much it will cost me for additional client? Remember that, again, it depends on the context. If there were here not 20 but 21, the figure will be different. Depends on which direction, we don't know. So there is no shortcut. We can't come up with this figure and then calculate the change. We first have to calculate the change based on a new budget, which is based on a new operational plan. But then we can calculate the break-even cost of additional client in this context, and this will be our decision rule. Okay, the decision rule, if we want, usually we will use the total calculation as decision rule. It's much easier, but we can also look at the break-even cost and say, well, if the rate is above this, the proposal will be advisable. So 4,000 will be still advisable. 3,500, no. All right, this is clear? Wow. What is this silence? What happened to you?
It's based on the rate for the adult, like that. The break-even is for when you're trying to decipher if it's okay that they're giving you that quantity, the 5,000.
Yes, this figure should be compared to the rate. Okay? So here we don't need that. It's not necessary. We know the rate. The rate is so and so. So we calculate and we figure out that we have a positive economic contribution, an increase in the economic contribution. But suppose that the Minister of Welfare said, well, I'm going to give you fund additional 20 clients, but the rate should be, it's a competitive, it should be determined in a bid, which means that you will offer the rate that you're willing and other organization will also bid, and the organization that will give me the lowest rate, I will give this organization these additional clients. Okay, this is a very common practice. The government that they are bidding their agreements with different organizations. So in that case, the process should be, again, first of all, the organization has to create a budget based on the additional 20 clients, calculate the additional cost here per month for additional 20 clients, and then divide it by 20 and reach a rate. And then when the organization bids, obviously they want the highest price, but then again they want to get the agreement. So they know that this is their lowest rate that they can offer. Any offer that they will give below that rate will create a negative economic contribution, will create eventually additional deficit. But any rate that they will offer above will be still economically feasible. So again, the decision is based on context. If the organization does not have any financial issues and it's fully funded, it can offer a rate which is very close to the break-even. Okay?